What is yours, Richard?
Fantastic. Has my PowerPoint come up as well?
It has, but it's come up in the view that you've got on your screen. Do you remember how we got it up to get a full...
Yeah. How do we alter that?
I don't know what you did last time, but you managed to... Yeah, try that.
That better?
That's it. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Okay. Don't ask me to do that again, because I'm not going to repeat it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for letting me present at your conference today. I've never done this before, not from my front room anyway, or from my office. So bear with me, and I'll try and explain what we've done and what we've come up with in terms of this mental health nursing passport. So I probably first of all ought to, put some context to where we're at. So basically, this is a bit of research, a job that was done between Edith Cowan University, the university I used to work at, and our industry partner, which is North Metro Mental Health Services. So North Metro Mental Health Services is a mental health service that provides both ambulatory care, so community-based care, and also hospital-based care to essentially the northern population of Perth. So probably to around, just under 500,000 people. So it's quite a large organisation. And one component of North Metro Health is the mental health component. And the vast majority of the workforce employed within the organisation are nurses and mental health nurses. So a cross between nurses that were trained traditionally, as you guys would see, I guess in a discipline-specific mental health focus, and also in Australia we have nurses that what we call comprehensively trained. So they're trained across all disciplines and can provide clinical interventions into both general health settings and mental health settings. So we've got a sort of quite diverse health population. So the reason this sort of this problem or this bit of research came up is because we were discussing, as all good projects start, over a cup of tea with a couple of industry colleagues around a few issues that they've got. And the issues that they came up with were essentially two things. They were wanting to find out how they could do governance better. So how could they demonstrate to the people that were accrediting them, and also how could they demonstrate to their most important customers, i.e. the patients, that they were providing a service that was based around some kind of clinical evidence, and it was also healthy and robust in terms of, from a clinician perspective as well. The second thing that we're grappling with was they've got an Asian workforce. The mean average of a nurse working in mental health over here is probably around 50 to 52. So they were trying to work out how do they sustain this workforce into the future, and also how do they look at upskilling a workforce that has got essentially a lot of generalist skills but not specific mental health skills. So those were the two big issues that they were grappling with, and they decided to lumber myself and Mike with this problem to solve. So we decided to take up the challenge, and this is where we started looking at this concept of a portfolio. So this is what we did. So I need to introduce you to the team. So there's myself and a guy called Mike Redmond. So my background is nursing, both general nursing and at postgrad level in mental health. And Mike Redmond, who was a clinical psychologist that I used to work with at ECU. We then got on two, I guess, research members of the team. A guy called Michael Finn, who is an experienced mental health nurse and general nurse, and also an experienced manager and researcher, so we got him on board. And when we sort of had a look at the idea of what kind of platform we could use when we come up with the idea of a portfolio, we got this girl called Jackie Patton involved. She's a person that's an IT expert, and she's had previous experience with PebblePad. Our most important people, the people that paid us, were the industry commissioners partners, which were Rosemary Hoffman. She's the Director of Nursing and Mental Health for North Metro, and also Karen Harrison, who provides a role as the director of the education arm and research arm of that organisation. So the 6 of us, I guess, worked together. The predominant work was done by the 4 of us, myself, Mike, Michael and Jackie, with a heck of a lot of consultation between the people that were, I guess, sponsoring this project. So we thought long and hard about how we're going to tackle this issue. And one thing, because myself and Mike had both been involved in health as, well, not only clinicians but managers, we looked at how we were going to embed these 2, I guess, concerns, 2 questions firmly in the core business of the service that's providing health to people with mental health issues in Perth. We thought the best way to do that would be to, first of all, look at it from the clinician's perspective and drive everything from a clinical perspective, because at the end of the day, the most important thing that we needed to ensure was that there were healthy interventions delivered by well-educated to people who were in psychological distress or had got some mental health issues. So we looked at the main needs of the employee or the clinician. The first one was this concept of lifelong learning and how could we address some of the lifelong learning needs that these nurses have. And also, how could we address some of the other things that they found really important. And one of the things that we took from a bit of research that we looked at and we undertook was around what motivates staff to be part of the workforce. And despite, I guess, the obvious other than being that they wanted to be paid, was that they needed to be happy in the workforce, they needed to feel that there was a sense of belonging and they're actually progressing, but they're also learning new skills as they went along. So those are the 2 very main issues that we looked at from a clinician perspective. Then we looked at, I guess, the other side of the coin, the industry perspective and the industry needs. And the 2 things that the industry said that they wanted from us was satisfying their corporate governance needs. So there was quite an overwhelming demand from the federal government and from funders to make sure that they got some really reasonable and robust corporate governance things in place. And also, how would they do with succession planning? What is their workforce going to look like, not just today, but what's it look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? And are there going to be enough skilled staff to deliver the kinds of care needs that a mental health client group need into the future? So those were the 2 things that they were grappling with. So the question is, how were we going to deal with these 2, I guess, diverse needs? And what sort of things could we do to ensure that staff felt healthy and wanted and respected, and also that the organisation felt that it was in quite a robust perspective as well. So we thought we could tackle it from building, I guess, a portfolio, an identity for each member of staff within the organisation. And the way that we thought we could do this was by using PebblePad. Myself and Mike had seen PebblePad used very successfully within our School of Midwifery to document clinical experiences for student midwives so they could demonstrate to their assessors how effective they'd been in delivering interventions, and also how they could use it when they were probably going out into the workforce as qualified staff to say to a prospective employee, this is who I am, these are the skills that I've acquired, and this is how I can verify those skills. So we really drove it from a clinician perspective, the idea being that if clinicians owned this thing, it would be more likely to succeed. But we also had to temper that with the needs of the organisation. How could this information we collect be useful to an employer for governance processes and also for the planning processes? So lifelong learning was an ethos. We needed to find something where we could demonstrate the skill base of each individual employee, which PebblePad does quite nicely, and we've seen that in action with the midwifery students. And some kind of digital verification of these skills for governance processes. So how could the organisation demonstrate that its workforce was not only well educated, but robust, and that it went through some kind of verification process? Sorry, that's my dog in the background. So, well, I've lost track. So, yeah, so the governance process. The other thing is, how can we use the data that we captured for succession planning? So we needed a front end of this process. So the front end was the Facebook page, the front page of PebblePad for the individual employee, and then we needed some reporting, some more sophisticated reporting mechanisms for the employee, which we could able to achieve by the employee allowing the employer to interrogate specific parts of their database. And that was around demographics. It wasn't based on an individual person, it was based on, I guess, a macro level view rather than a micro level view. So how do we go about it? Well, we started doing, as most research projects start, a bit of a lit review and looking at what was out there. And that's how we come up with the PebblePad as the platform. And by the way, I'm not paid by PebblePad at all. I have no other allegiance other than I think it's a really useful project for something like this. So I really need to state that this is I really believe in this as a medium because it's worked for us and I've seen it working in action. So I want to put that out there at the centre. But I think you need to consider something like this if you're going into a governance process like we were. The other thing is that when we looked at other digital platforms, there wasn't anything that was as flexible and as adaptable as PebblePad on the market. So in terms of back-end reporting, but also the ability to present it in a way that was meaningful to the front-end user, i.e. the clinician, and also to the back-end user, i.e. the organisation. So when we found our medium, we tried to do two things. We looked at the roles and positions that were the nurses held in the organisation. So we essentially wanted to find out what our workforce looked like. And that included generic roles and any subspecialities as well. So we looked at generic community mental health nurses, we looked at generic nurses who were working in inpatient, then we looked at subspecialities like liaison nurses, we looked at ED positions, emergency department positions, we looked at forensic nursing, we looked at child and adolescent nursing, we looked at older persons nursing. So we looked at what this organisation looks like from a workforce perspective. We then went on to try and find out, were there any defined sets of skills that anybody had talked about in Australia around what should this workforce look like in terms of, if I've got a base level nurse or a junior nurse, what skills should they be able to demonstrate? And what sort of intervention should they practically and reasonably ought to be able to deliver to a patient? And then we looked at that throughout the hierarchy of the organisation. So over here, our nursing workforce is essentially broken down into three categories: a level 1 nurse, a level 2 nurse, and a level 3 nurse. And they go up in seniority. So a level 1 nurse is quite a junior nurse. A level 2 nurse is, I suppose, to equate it to you guys, like a senior staff nurse. And a level 3 nurse is like a nurse manager or a charge nurse or a sister. And we looked at the particular skill sets that those groups of individuals might have. A leading document that we used was a document done by an organisation called Health Workforce Australia. This is essentially a federal government, so a national government think tank around workforce planning, workforce progression and workforce education across all disciplines. So that's across nursing, medicine and allied health. And they already established a set of standards which they thought 3 different levels in a hierarchy could achieve. So we got a nice framework to deal with, and then we sort of added to that. So then we looked at, from an organisation perspective, what did the organisation need in terms of organisation-wide mandatory skills for their staff? So it was things like manual handling, or health and safety things, things like lifting and moving patients. Then things like, how to administer medication, how to do basic things like, say, basic life support, aggression training, all those kind of things that organisations need to demonstrate that they've been through with their staff to make them safe. So we tamped this onto the workbooks in PebblePad. So we had workbooks that were specific to a particular staff group and then particular to the organisation. We then held a set of workforce focus groups to look at what individual clinicians thought could be added to these skill sets that we'd already identified. And of course, no surprise for anybody here, but each clinician told us they were completely unique and they had a skill set that nobody else had got. It was really important for us to document that. So we went and through a sort of almost a Delphi process, we wheedled those down to core skill sets that individual nurses would attain at a particular level. And again, looked at subspecialties as well, such as forensic, older persons and child adolescent. Then what we did is we identified information that might assist the individual, so the clinician, in things like credentialing or registration with professional bodies. Over here, there's a nationwide body called AHPRA, which regulates nursing, medicine and allied health. So every year we have to register with AHPRA to say we're a competent clinician, and we are a competent clinician because we've met a set of workforce points, which is around education, but also that we have met a set of competencies as well. And that differs from discipline to discipline. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we were capturing on this document, this portfolio, would be also useful for clinicians to demonstrate their ability to register with a professional body. So there weren't double handling and double collecting things. Also, the one thing that we did get feedback from clinicians was that they did this ordinarily in the course of re-registration, but they tended to put that information to verify their professional standing on their home computer or their laptop or memory sticks, and invariably they lost them. So the idea of a cloud-based platform was quite useful, so that this information could be got at quite short notice and uploaded into whatever other platform they needed. Then what we did is we looked at, okay, so if we've got a particular group that have got a particular skill set, and say, for example, I'll give you an example of a nurse. So you've got a nurse level 1, so it's an initial level practicing nurse. And for example, we identified maybe five skills, essential skills that they got. And then maybe another 5 that were attributable to a subspeciality. We identified more, but I'm just going to work with 5, so bear with me. And then what we did is we looked at that nurse in terms of a person that may want to progress their career. And so the next level would be a level 2 nurse. So we assumed that a level 2 nurse would have all the skill sets of a level 1, plus an added, say, 5 skills for a level 2. So we wanted to work out how we would educate or enable that staff member to go from a level 1 to a level 2. So we did this by looking at the back-end interrogation and reporting processes within PebblePad, so that we could work out, when we're looking at a workforce from a macro perspective, which level 1 nurses would have demonstrated, say, a set of level 2 skills. And say, for example, a level 1 nurse would have either 5 competencies or skills for a level 1, and then maybe 4 of the skills for level 2. Now, when we're doing the data reporting, if we saw that that was a common theme, and that a lot of our workforce who were level 1 nurses had one skill set missing, that means that it would probably be useful to provide some education and training to upskill them, so that when there was a vacancy for a level 2 position, we could demonstrate from a competence and a credentialing and a governance perspective that we've got staff that were going into active positions that were actually competent to do that role. So that's where we're at with the project. We've essentially built the platform. We identified the skills that each level of nurse should aspire to. We've built a provision in where nurses can gather additional information for credentialing and registration. We've also built in a mechanism by where nurses can add other things. For example, they may have been to courses that are outside the scope of the organisation, or they might have done a presentation, or they might have acquired a skill set that they think is quite useful to demonstrate to a prospective employee. So that's where we're at with the moment. We're about to go into the rollout phase, which is quite exciting, which is going to involve a lot of education and training for both the individual, but also for health service managers as well, to be able to interrogate this data and use this data meaningfully for workforce planning. So we've ended up with a flexible platform that captures a whole lot of individual skills and a whole lot of other useful stuff. Especially skills for a particular work group. It helps us identify workforce strengths and also workplace strengths, so particular areas within our organisation. It's helped us identify staff who are capable of moving on to more senior roles. Also enables us to look at workforce learning needs and also other useful information for workforce planning as well, especially in terms of risk management. And that's essentially where we're at.
Okay, thanks Richard. Are you still there, Alison?
I am.
Oh.
That's fine.
How are you? Can you see me okay?
Do you want to click on Richard then again?
Yeah, I've got to click on you, Richard, apparently. Hang on.
Okay.
Wow, that's it. That's looking better.
I think Richard just isn't sharing his screen, I think.
Yeah, there's your desktops.
Oh, hold on 2 seconds.
Right, have we got any questions for Richard? Or for Alison?
I was wondering a bit about the size of the rollout here. I didn't quite gather. Is this sort of across the, how many people are we talking about? How many end users?
Okay, we're talking about 1,500, approximately 1,500 end users. So that's just the mental health nursing component of North Metro Health.
How have the employers reacted to the project? Don't know if we heard.
Sorry?
How have the employers reacted to the project?
The employees have acted really well. I guess it was about how we went about it. We included them right from the start, so we basically got them to determine what they thought their skill sets were. So there was a really, we focused on ownership as part of this process. So we wanted to make sure that it was owned by the individual. So this is a portfolio that is particular to an individual, and we found that they took to that very well. That it has some meaning to them because it was something that they had to do for registration purposes, and it was something that they did at varying degrees of success, I guess, as it were. And one of the things that we did find from talking to staff is that the way that the registration process happens over here, and I think it's similar in the UK, is that the registration bodies audit a certain number of staff. So what happens is staff usually scramble for verification or information when they're being audited, and they don't actually do this as an upfront process. They do it sort of a retrospective process, which puts them into a tailspin and a bit of a panic. So the focus from us was basically making sure that it was driven from the ground rather than from, I guess, the organisational and managerial perspective, although it obviously has its benefits for the organisation in terms of governance.
I was wondering, Richard, how many workbooks have had to be created to manage all of the different levels of nurses?
So there's three workbooks for the three essential areas. So there's a level 1 workbook, a level 2 workbook, a level 3 workbook. And within that, there are subdomains. So there are things around things like engagement, respect, empowerment, and then there's some intervention type things as well. These are standards that have been set by Workforce Australia. So we thought it would be useful to use them. And then alongside these three main groups, there are subspecialty workbooks. So we had to create a subspecialty workbook for forensic nurses, for older persons nurses, for community nurses, and then a generic set for what we term liaison nurses. So these are nurses that work in general health settings but provide mental health services.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions for Richard?
How does you see it working in terms of people coming from the UK across to work abroad, in terms of flexibility of staff?
Could you hear that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. Pam's asking if how do you see this being useful for nurses that come over from the UK to work in Australia?
I see it applicable for a whole range of. I mean, nursing was the first come off the rank. I see this applicable for all disciplines. It's not just a nursing thing. It's a governance thing that goes across the board. But it could be useful to build up a portfolio to demonstrate that you've got a particular skill set that would allow you to register in Australia. Absolutely. At the moment, this is just being done in one jurisdiction, Western Australia. So, I mean, my wish would be that this would be a concept that would be taken up nationwide, and that a registration body would look at on this favourably as well, because the driver for us is about patient outcomes and about ensuring that the patients that we deliver interventions to have got the best interventions based on some sound clinical evidence and based on current contemporary knowledge as well.
There are a lot of similarities with a lot of the requirements of health professionals over here too. Is there anything you wanted to add, Alison?
No, not really, Deb. I mean, Richard's the expert on this area, so I think he's done that really well.
I was just wondering if there are any, if you've seen a sort of an increase in healthcare use in general in Australia, as we have here.
Absolutely, it's definitely the big growth area. I went to a conference this year, it's a health educators conference, and I went to it last year as well, and the change in the interest in systems like PebblePad, luckily we were the only one there, it had grown enormously, and obviously the whole portfolio idea in various disciplines in health is really becoming a big focus point here in Australia.
Can I just add to that, Alison? I think we've seen a really useful application of PebblePad at an undergrad level for both nurses and midwives. And one of the things that, and I don't know how this guy pulled it off, but one of the things over here is that a guy who was working in Tasmania as a PhD project got all 28 universities who provide nursing education to have one set of documentation to verify clinical skills on placements. So he provided one workbook, as it were, for all student nurses, so that it meant that when student nurses went to a hospital, and there might be at any one time 5 or 6 different universities providing students to that hospital, that the clinical staff only has to be familiar with one set of documentation. Now, I would see that something like PebblePad would be particularly useful in that kind of area as well. Now, if you extend that to its logical conclusion in the fact that student nurses or students of any discipline will become registered with that discipline eventually, if you've got a familiar platform or a familiar way of verifying your skills that you've done at an undergraduate level, you'll feel very comfortable with doing it for verification for a registration process as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of nods in the room that would be fantastic if we had some generic approach this sort of thing.
It's a bit like common sense. It's not very common.
Yeah. There's another question from the floor, so if I could hand.
Yes, sorry. It's just a question. This is for qualified nurses, and I'm wondering, have they got a specific time frame in which they have to complete level 1? And at the end of completing it, is there a reward system in place? Like, is it a promotionary system? And is there agreement on that at government level, or has anything like that come out of it?
So, sorry, could you repeat the question again?
It's all right, we're getting a bit further to the back of the room here. We were wondering if there was a time frame on completing the levels, and also if there was a reward system like promotion, that type of thing, if they complete.
We haven't looked at a time frame, and I guess it's like with any. The problem with setting any skill or competency-based thing is that you've got to be very careful that if you've got an existing workforce and that workforce can't demonstrate a level of competency, then consequently they're deemed incompetent, which is not something that someone wants to hear about themselves. So I guess we thought about a grandfather clause on this, and this being part of a professional development. So it might be that when a nurse goes to his or her supervisor for their performance appraisal, that they could work on this document as part of their performance appraisal and use it as a stepping stone to career progression. I guess one of the things that was the big reward and incentive, especially for a lot of junior staff, is for their ability to say to their employee, hey, I am a junior member of staff, but I have got these extra skills that I've chased down as well. And if there's any acting up positions or any senior positions, I'm here. I'm ready to do that. In terms of monetary or financial reward, we haven't sort of looked at that. In Australia, health services do provide a monetary reward for staff who've gone and got tertiary level qualifications. So if you're a nurse who's then gone and got a master's or a PhD, there are a set of payments that you'll receive on top of your salary because you actually furthered your education.
And would this form part of that? Is this a qualification? Is this a master's?
Does it get accredited at all?
What the skills?
No, we just wondered if by completing it they actually get some sort of accreditation towards further development, like maybe master's credits or.
Well, we've looked at this as well. We've looked at how we can look at recognition of prior learning across different groups. Now, one concept that we've looked at is there's this thing called MHPod in Australia, which is essentially an online learning set of modules that individuals within a mental health context, whether they be nurses, doctors, or allied health, can do. And this has been rolled out by the federal government. Some universities, including my own university, are looking at using those modules as recognition of prior learning to some postgraduate degree courses. And one of the things that we thought about in terms of workforce development is that it might be useful to embed the verification for these things on PebblePad as part of the portfolio. So you could go to a prospective tertiary education provider and say, look, I've done this, this is how I've demonstrated it, have a look at it.
Okay, thank you. Got time for one more question? Yeah.
Richard talked about the moving the project towards rollout and education and support amongst clinical staff and healthcare management. I'm keen to hear what sort of approaches they've taken to educate and support both types of users.
Could you hear that one, Richard?
Yeah, we're about to embark on that. So we just wait for the next one to be released for the intervention stage, and what we're planning on doing is developing a trainer package for essentially clinical champions, people who might want to be the first users the first cab off the rank, if you were. And we're particularly looking at younger IT savvy workforce, but also the older end of the workforce that have got a particular passion for IT as well. So we're looking at it at both ends, and hopefully that can create some, I guess, some fervour, some enthusiasm. So from there we'll create some train the training type information education session, and hopefully these clinical champions will lead that. We're also going to have to provide some education and training for service managers so that they can start to interrogate that backhand of PebblePad to get some meaningful data out. Because that's the thing that I quite like as a past health service manager, is that having some real-time data to look at what my workforce looks like and where do I need to be putting my dollars or pounds in terms of upskilling that workforce, and also ensuring that I've got that corporate governance covered as well. So it's going to be twofold, from nurse managers and health service managers in terms of reporting and getting some meaningful data, and then but really driven from the shop floor in terms of looking at people that are enthusiastic about this. Because it's a bit like that horse whispering thing. I think that once people see it, although they may not be curious initially, when you get a body of people using it, I think people start to cotton on that this might be useful. The reason why we think it might get some traction is that the staff are having to do this for accreditation anyway, and if they've got a nice, usable platform to be able to collect that information, then they're probably going to use it.
Any further questions? I mean, your timing was perfect, Richard. Thank you very much. I think
that's not my fault, Jack.
And I think the audience are ready for a coffee break. But thanks very much for going above and beyond your call of day. And the links work perfectly. So
fantastic.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Alison.
No problem.
Thanks everyone. Have a good time.
Thanks, Alison.
Bye.
Bye, Richard. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
There you are.
Bye. Okay, I hope you found that useful. I am majorly relieved now that was successful. We've got I think it's a half-hour tea break, is it? We've got a tea break now, so we'll come and mingle with you two and get to know each other a little better, and we'll see you back here at 11:45. Thanks. Sure.